The Korak were considered the ultimate apex predators, a species that had risen to the top of the food chain not only on their homeworld but across countless star systems. For centuries, the galaxy trembled beneath their rule. Towering and brutal, their physical strength was unmatched, their intelligence cunning, and their brutality legendary. With dark, chitinous armor covering their bodies and retractable claws sharper than any known blade, they slaughtered with an efficiency that could only come from the galaxy's most refined predator. Their eyes, burning with a yellow hue, could pierce through the darkness of space or the forested depths of any planet they decided to claim. The Korak's physical prowess was staggering, but it was their adaptability and ruthless drive that truly set them apart. They weren't simply killing machines, they were a society that valued strength, hierarchy, and domination above all else. Their warlords, generals, and leaders ruled with an iron fist, each one more vicious than the last, constantly evolving their tactics, strategies, and military technology to stay ahead of any potential rivals. Their brutal conquest of the galaxy was built on the idea that only the strongest should survive. They were not merely predators, they were conquerors. Civilizations fell before them, planets turned to dust, and species were wiped out without a second thought. Those who survived under Korak rule were either assimilated into their empire or exterminated. It was a way of life for the Korak, a brutal, merciless march toward galactic domination that no other species seemed capable of stopping. For centuries, no one questioned the Korak's supremacy. Other species, even those who considered themselves powerful, would fall into line as soon as the Korak arrived, too afraid of the devastation they could bring. The Korak's war fleets stretched across the stars, unchallenged and uncontested. The galaxy was their domain, their prey, and their hunting ground. They had crushed every challenge, eradicated every resistance, and solidified their place at the top of the cosmic hierarchy. But all that changed when humans entered the fold. At first, the Korak dismissed humanity as a fleeting nuisance. The humans had only just begun to explore space, and their technology was primitive compared to the sophisticated weapons of the Korak. They had no interstellar empire, no history of conquest, and no real presence in the galaxy. They were, at best, a curiosity, a race that had barely made it beyond their own planet and still relied on outdated methods of warfare. They weren't even on the radar of the Korak warlords, who believed they could be ignored as they focused on more pressing matters of galactic conquest. The first encounter between the Korak and humans came when a human exploratory vessel accidentally drifted into Korak-controlled space. The humans, naive and unaware of the dangers they faced, sent a distress signal after their ship was boarded by Korak raiders. The Korak, assuming they were dealing with an inferior race, moved in with typical aggression, but this time, they underestimated their prey. The humans fought back in a way no one had expected. They were not as physically strong as the Korak, but they had something far more dangerous: resourcefulness. The human crew, led by Captain Amelia Hahn, fought with an ingenuity that the Korak could not have predicted. Using rudimentary weapons, makeshift traps, and basic combat tactics, they inflicted damage on the Korak invaders in ways that left the Korak stunned. It wasn't the way a battle was supposed to go. The Korak were supposed to win without a fight, their enemies crushed under the weight of their superior strength. But the humans didn't just lay down and die. They fought tooth and nail, holding off the Korak raiders long enough for their ship to escape, and their message would send shockwaves throughout Korak space. The humans were not like other species. They didn't bend or submit easily. And they were not as weak as they appeared. At first, the Korak brushed off the incident as an anomaly, a fluke. But as time went on, more reports came in of humans resisting them. The humans began to establish themselves as a thorn in the side of the Korak Empire. It started with small skirmishes, small human vessels making daring raids on Korak supply lines. Then, it escalated. The humans began striking at the heart of Korak operations, targeting their most valuable resources and military installations. They were clever, surgical, and unrelenting. The Korak, for the first time in centuries, were beginning to lose ground. What the Korak hadn't anticipated was the humans' ability to learn and adapt. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were learning from every engagement, improving their tactics and technology with remarkable speed. The human military, though still primitive compared to the Korok, began to develop weapons and technology that could counter the Korok's strengths. They discovered weaknesses in the Korok's armor, developed new forms of warfare designed to neutralize the Korok's fearsome advantages, and exploited the Korok's overconfidence. It was as if the humans had tapped into something deep within themselves, something that no one, not even the Korok, had predicted, an unyielding drive to overcome. As the human resistance continued to grow, the Korok found themselves on the defensive for the first time in their history. Entire colonies that had once been under their rule began to rebel, inspired by the humans' courage. The Korok's military forces, stretched thin by multiple fronts, struggled to contain the growing threat. They fought back with all their might, but it wasn't enough. The humans were everywhere, infiltrating Korok strongholds, sabotaging their fleets, and striking where it hurt most. What had once seemed like a contest of strength between the Korok and all others had turned into a battle of attrition, a war of will and intelligence. And in that arena, the Korok were slowly losing. At the heart of this conflict stood Captain Amelia Hahn, the unlikeliest of heroes. A former soldier with a deep understanding of the human spirit, she had rallied humanity against the Korok and orchestrated some of their most successful campaigns. Under her leadership, the humans had become a force to be reckoned with. Han had a rare gift of seeing the bigger picture, of understanding that their fight was not just against the Korok's strength, but against their arrogance. She knew that the Korok saw themselves as gods, indestructible, unstoppable, and that they would never expect a race like humanity to challenge them. The first major victory came on the planet Garath, a Korok stronghold that had been one of the last bastions of their military might. It was a planet that had never known defeat, and its fall would mark the beginning of the Korok's downfall. Han and her fleet launched a surprise assault on Garath, using stealth tactics and advanced weaponry. The battle was fierce, but the humans managed to disable the planet's defense systems and destroy the Korok's primary military base. The loss was devastating for the Korok. It wasn't just the destruction of a planet, but the destruction of the myth that the Korok were invincible. But the real turning point came when the humans launched a full-scale offensive across Korok-controlled space. Using a combination of guerrilla tactics, advanced weaponry, and brilliant strategies, they pushed the Korok back at every turn. It wasn't just a military victory, it was psychological warfare. The Korok, who had spent centuries instilling fear and submission in the galaxy, were now the ones who feared. Their warlords, their leaders, even their soldiers began to question their superiority. The Korok, for the first time in their history, began to fall apart. Their once unified empire fractured under the pressure of the human assault. Their warlords began to turn on each other, and entire fleets started to crumble as they tried to defend their dwindling territory. The Korok were no longer a singular force to be reckoned with, they were a scattered, desperate species trying to maintain their grip on a galaxy that no longer feared them. Humanity, however, was not content to let the Korok merely collapse. The humans, driven by an unwavering sense of justice and vengeance for the suffering the Korok had caused, began their final push to eliminate the Korok from the galaxy completely. The Korok, the once feared apex predators, found themselves hunted, cornered, and outmatched. Their technology, their war beasts, their brute strength, all of it proved useless against the relentless ingenuity of humanity. It took years, but eventually, the Korok were wiped out. Every last one of them eradicated from existence. The species that had once ruled with an iron fist, the apex predators that had slaughtered countless civilizations, were no more. The galaxy that had trembled before their might now stood in the wake of their annihilation, left to rebuild in the absence of their once unstoppable presence. In the end, the Korok learned a bitter lesson that even the most powerful predators can be killed, that no one is invincible, and that the unlikeliest of enemies can rise to become their greatest threat. The galaxy, once ruled by the Korok, now found itself in an era of unprecedented change. The humans, though victorious, faced a daunting challenge, rebuilding a fractured cosmos left in the wake of the Korok's destruction. Entire sectors were left in chaos, their infrastructure shattered, their societies in disarray. Planets that had been held under Korak rule for centuries struggled to find their footing without the brutal dominance that had, for better or worse, held them together. The humans, having claimed the mantle of the galaxy's new apex species, now had to confront the immense responsibility that came with their victory. What would they do with their newfound power? Would they follow the path of the Korak, imposing their will on others through fear and domination? Or would they be different, learning from the mistakes of the past and striving to build something better? Captain Amelia Hahn, now hailed as a hero, stood at the heart of this transformation. As the human representative to the Federation, she found herself leading not just a military campaign but a diplomatic one. The survivors of the Korak's empire, once terrified by their oppressors, now looked to the humans to see what kind of rulers they would become. The question was no longer about survival, it was about what kind of galaxy they would create in the aftermath of the Korak's reign. The first challenge was dealing with the remnants of the Korak's forces. Though the Korak as a species had been eradicated, their military forces had not all been destroyed. Warlords and commanders, once loyal to the Korak hierarchy, had fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, determined to rebuild their strength and restore the Korak to their former glory. These scattered remnants of the Korak Empire formed rogue factions, war bands of bloodthirsty survivors, each led by a former general or high-ranking officer. These warlords, unbowed by their people's defeat, vowed to take back the galaxy they had lost. Humanity, now scattered across the stars and building alliances with former adversaries, found itself thrust into another conflict. The remnants of the Korak Empire were relentless. They waged guerrilla warfare, raided peaceful colonies, and attacked supply lines, determined to destabilize humanity's rule. These rogue factions were driven by a singular goal: to restore the Korak to their former dominance. Captain Hahn, while regarded as a strategic genius, was deeply concerned. The galaxy had been through enough destruction. The people of the former Korak territories wanted peace. They wanted stability. But the warlords and their followers threatened to plunge the galaxy into another era of bloodshed and ruin. Hahn and her allies knew that the only way to prevent another war of extinction was to crush the Korak remnants once and for all. The human military, having grown stronger with time and experience, prepared for this new phase of the war. Yet, Hahn knew that strength alone wouldn't win the day. The remnants of the Korak were more than just warriors, they were a symbol of something deeper, a longing for revenge and pride, a burning desire to restore what had been lost. Humanity needed to approach the conflict with more than just firepower, they needed to win hearts and minds, to show the galaxy that they were different from the Korak. Hahn gathered representatives from across the human colonies, forming a council to decide on the next steps. Her strategy was one of unity, not domination. She proposed a campaign of outreach and diplomacy to reach the Korak warlords, to try to convince them that the galaxy no longer belonged to the Korak, nor did it belong to any one species. It was time for a new era, one based on mutual respect, peace, and cooperation. The Federation would be a force of stability, not fear. However, there were many who disagreed with Hahn's peaceful approach. The war had left scars, deep and permanent. Many of the human colonies, especially those directly affected by Korak conquest, demanded vengeance. They wanted the Korak remnants hunted down, eradicated, and wiped from existence. There was no room for negotiation with those who had once enslaved entire civilizations. The wounds were too fresh, the pain too raw. Hahn found herself in a delicate position, balancing the desires for retribution with the need for a peaceful resolution. She knew that unchecked vengeance could tear the galaxy apart, but at the same time, she had to respect the desires of those who had suffered the most under Korak rule. The task before her was monumental: to unite a fractured galaxy under a common goal of peace while ensuring that the Korak remnants were neutralized once and for all. The first step in this delicate process was to confront the largest and most dangerous of the Korak warlords, a towering figure known as Vorak the Unyielding. Vorak had once been one of the Korak's greatest generals, feared and respected by all who encountered him. Even after the fall of the Korak, Vorak refused to submit. He had rallied a massive force of Korak loyalists and other alien species who had been aligned with the Korak's empire. He was preparing for an all-out assault on humanity's central colonies, determined to restore the Korak to their former glory. Captain Han, having gathered intelligence from human scouts and defectors from Vorak's ranks, devised a daring plan. She would lead a fleet directly into Vorak's stronghold, a massive fortress on the gas giant Karen, where he had gathered his forces. It was a risky move. Vorak was notorious for his cunning, and he had fortified his position beyond anything the humans had faced. But Han believed that this was their best chance to end the Korak threat once and for all. The battle that followed was one of the most brutal in human history. Han's fleet engaged in a fierce space battle with Vorak's forces, while ground troops launched an assault on the heavily fortified stronghold. The Korak warlords' forces were ferocious, but they were not the unstoppable force they once had been. The humans fought with precision and discipline, making use of the advanced tactics they had honed during their long war with the Korak. When Han finally confronted Vorak face to face, it was in the depths of his citadel, amid the wreckage of his fallen warships. Vorak, standing tall and proud, was a symbol of everything the Korak had been: unrelenting, powerful, and fiercely proud. But Han could see the cracks beneath his arrogance. The Korak were broken. Their empire was gone. Vorak's dream of restoring the Korak to their former dominance was nothing more than a hollow ambition. "What is left to fight for, Vorak?" Han asked, her voice calm but firm. "Your people are dead. Your empire is dust. There is no future in vengeance." Vorak sneered, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you have won? You think you have defeated us? The Korak are eternal, Captain. We will rise again, and when we do, we will crush your pathetic species underfoot." Han met his gaze unwaveringly. "The Korak are finished. The galaxy doesn't need monsters anymore." In that final moment, Han made the decision to offer Vorak a chance to surrender. She knew the cost of continuing the fight would be catastrophic for both sides, but she also knew that the warlord's pride was unbreakable. He would rather die than surrender. And so, in a final act of defiance, Vorak chose to end his life rather than live in defeat. His death marked the last stand of the Korak as a force in the galaxy. With Vorak's death, the last remnants of the Korak Empire crumbled. The warlords were gone, their followers scattered or eliminated. The galaxy was left in the hands of those who had fought to free it. Humanity had not only destroyed the Korak, but had also dismantled the cycle of violence and hatred that had defined their reign. But the victory was bittersweet. The galaxy would never be the same. The scars of war ran deep, and the memories of the Korak's brutality would linger for generations. Humanity now stood as the new rulers of the galaxy, not by force of arms alone, but by the wisdom they had gained from their struggle. The galaxy was theirs to rebuild, and they would do so with a vision of unity, peace, and respect for all life. As Captain Amelia Han looked out across the stars, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The humans had become the apex predators, but with that power came the responsibility to never become what they had defeated. They would learn from the Korak's mistakes, and with time, they would lead the galaxy into a new era, one where the cycle of violence and dominance would no longer reign. It was a new dawn for the galaxy, one where humans would set the course for peace, but only time would tell if they could truly overcome the darkness that had once consumed the Korak. The galaxy's fate was no longer in the hands of the deadliest predators, it was in the hands of the survivors. The victory over the Korak, while monumental, left a galaxy that was, in many ways, still in pieces. The scars of war, both physical and emotional, ran deep throughout the former Korak territories and beyond. Planets once ravaged by their reign were in the process of rebuilding, but the path to recovery was anything but smooth. Trust between different species, once fractured by the long years of domination, was difficult to rebuild. The trauma of the Korak's brutality still echoed in every corner of the galaxy, and many feared that the cycle of violence might one day repeat itself, this time, with humanity at the top of the food chain. Captain Amelia Han, now a figure of legend, found herself torn between her role as the galaxy's de facto leader and the weight of the choices she had made. While she had been hailed as a hero, the responsibility of leading a fractured galaxy weighed heavily on her shoulders. The unity she had fought so hard to achieve was fragile, and even now, the fear that humanity might follow in the footsteps of the Korak imposing their dominance through force was a concern many species shared. It was in this uneasy peace that the next challenge arose. Months after the final defeat of the Korak warlords, strange and unsettling signals began to emerge from deep space. At first, they seemed like background noise, unusual anomalies that could easily be dismissed. But the signals grew stronger, more distinct, and more coordinated. Human scientists, working in conjunction with the Federation's allied species, began to decipher the transmissions. What they uncovered was not just random noise or a new alien species, it was the echo of something old, something ancient. A presence long thought extinct in the galaxy, or at least beyond the reach of known space. The signals came from a distant sector, an uncharted region of the galaxy where no human or Korak vessel had ever ventured. The transmission seemed to be a warning, a message encoded in a language older than anything humanity had encountered. But it wasn't the strange nature of the signal that was most concerning, it was the message itself: you are not alone. The discovery of the signal sent shockwaves through the Federation. The idea of encountering a new and potentially hostile power was daunting. Humanity had already faced a galactic threat in the form of the Korak, and the Federation's resources were still stretched thin. Even worse, the new signal didn't just suggest the presence of another advanced species, it hinted at a force even older than the Korak, perhaps something even more dangerous. Captain Han was once again thrust into the spotlight, tasked with leading an expedition to investigate the source of the mysterious signal. She knew the risks, but she also understood that ignoring this new threat could be just as dangerous as facing it head-on. The galaxy was still reeling from a war with the Korak, and the last thing it needed was another catastrophic conflict. Han gathered a fleet of ships, a coalition of the strongest factions from the Federation and beyond. The crew included military commanders, scientists, diplomats, and strategists, each with a different role to play in the upcoming mission. They would venture into the unknown, seeking answers to the origins of the signal and the mysterious force behind it. As the fleet made its way toward the distant sector, tensions began to rise. There were those within the Federation who questioned Han's decision to go after the signal at all. Some believed it was too dangerous, that the galaxy needed time to heal and rebuild before facing another threat. Others feared that pursuing the source of the signal would lead to a new war, one that humanity might not be ready for. But Han was resolute. She had been through too much to ignore the possibility that the galaxy's peace could be shattered again. And besides, the signal wasn't going to stop on its own. It had to be investigated, and if a new threat was on the horizon, humanity had to be prepared. As the fleet entered the uncharted sector, they discovered a vast and ancient relic, a derelict space station floating in the emptiness, its massive size dwarfing any ship in the fleet. Its dark metal surface seemed almost organic, covered in strange runes and symbols that no human or alien had ever seen. The station was unlike anything they had encountered, and the closer they got, the more they realized that this was not just a piece of technology. It was a remnant of something far older, far more powerful than any of them could comprehend. The fleet approached cautiously, sending scout ships to investigate the station. Han, standing on the bridge of her flagship, watched as the smaller vessels entered the station's orbit. The crew, already on high alert, could feel the tension mounting. Something was wrong. The station was abandoned, but there was a lingering sense of life, as though it was merely waiting for something. Then, they found it. Deep within the station's core, buried beneath layers of forgotten technology, was a room that seemed to pulse with energy. In the center of the room stood an object, a towering structure that resembled a crystalline obelisk. Its surface was translucent, glowing faintly in the dark expanse of the station. As the scout team attempted to approach, the room began to come alive, lights flickered, and the ground shook as if some ancient force had been awakened. It wasn't just a station, it was a beacon. And whatever had created it was still out there. Suddenly, an automated message came through. The language was incomprehensible at first, but the Federation's best linguists worked quickly to translate the transmission. What they uncovered sent chills down the spine of every crew member. "You have awakened the Guardians." The message was clear. The source of the signal wasn't a race or species, but a long-dormant force known only as the Guardians. Who or what they were, no one knew. But it was clear that they had been watching the galaxy for a very long time. The Guardians' message was chilling. They spoke of an ancient conflict, of a time when they had once kept balance across the galaxy. But something had happened, something had gone wrong. The Guardians had been forced into dormancy, their technology and presence hidden away to protect the galaxy from an even greater, unfathomable threat. This revelation rocked the Federation to its core. There had always been stories and myths of ancient, godlike entities that had shaped the galaxy's history. Some had dismissed them as legends. Others had believed them to be the stuff of fantasy. But now, it seemed those legends were true. The Guardians were real, and they were not pleased with the state of the galaxy. As the crew began to explore further, they discovered more about the Guardians, about their mission to maintain balance and peace in the galaxy. But there was a twist. The Guardians were not protectors in the traditional sense. They had been created for one singular purpose: to neutralize threats to the galaxy's balance. They were warriors, not diplomats. And if the current state of the galaxy, its fractured political landscape, its constant wars and rebellions was any indication, they saw humanity and the Federation as a growing threat to that balance. The crew quickly realized that the Guardians were not simply going to sit by and watch humanity's expansion. They were going to take action. They had the power to reshape the galaxy, and they weren't concerned with who or what was in their way. They had no allegiance to any species, no understanding of compassion. They were an unstoppable force that had only one goal: restoring balance, even if it meant wiping out entire civilizations in the process. Captain Han's worst fears were realized. The galaxy, once liberated from the Korik's tyranny, was now facing a force far greater, far more ancient, and more ruthless. The Guardians, it seemed, had come to finish what they had started, whether humanity liked it or not. The future of the galaxy was once again at a crossroads. Would humanity be able to navigate this new, terrifying conflict with the same courage and ingenuity that had defeated the Korik? Or would they fall victim to the cold, calculating judgment of the Guardians, who saw them as nothing more than another threat to the fragile balance of the cosmos? Captain Han knew one thing for sure: this time, the battle wouldn't be about brute strength or military might. It would be a fight for survival against a force beyond anyone's comprehension. And this time, humanity would need to find a way to win, not by becoming the strongest predator, but by proving they were worth the galaxy's survival. The next chapter of their story was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy was once again in their hands. The revelations about the Guardians shook the very core of the Federation and the galaxy at large. Humanity, having fought and won against the Korik, now faced a new and far more enigmatic adversary. The Guardians, ancient and indifferent, did not care for the alliances, politics, or struggles that consumed the galaxy. They existed for one purpose: balance, and they saw humanity as a disturbance in that balance. Captain Amelia Han, standing at the helm of her flagship Vigilance, now faced a moral and strategic dilemma of unprecedented proportions. The Guardians were a threat of a magnitude humanity had never encountered, and the Federation's military might, impressive as it was, seemed no match for such an ancient, godlike force. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive, it was whether they could find a way to coexist with this ancient order, or if they would have to fight for their very existence. Han's mind raced as she paced across the bridge of the Vigilance, the weight of the galaxy's future heavy on her shoulders. Her crew, her allies, the entire Federation, all of them depended on her decisions now. And for the first time, she felt the burden of leadership in its truest form. The Korik had been an enemy of flesh and blood, conquerable through strategy and military might. But the Guardians were different. They were something far more profound, a manifestation of cosmic order itself, unbending and unyielding. The message from the Guardians echoed in her mind: "You have awakened the Guardians." She stared at the holographic projections on the bridge, showing the Federation fleet assembled around the ancient relic, the derelict space station where they had first encountered the warning. The Guardians' presence was everywhere now, quiet, looming. No one knew how far their reach truly extended. But they had made it clear that humanity, and the entire Federation, were now under their watchful gaze. The Federation Council convened in an emergency session to discuss how to respond to the looming threat. Tensions were high, with every representative human and alien arguing over how to proceed. Some, especially those from worlds that had suffered under the Korak, wanted to launch a full-scale assault. They were unwilling to bow to yet another power in the galaxy, particularly one that had not yet shown any overt signs of mercy or understanding. Others, more diplomatic in nature, urged caution, suggesting that they attempt to communicate further with the Guardians and explore the possibility of negotiation. Han, for her part, remained silent for much of the meeting, deep in thought. When the Council's debate reached an impasse, Han spoke, her voice calm but firm. "We can't fight them the way we fought the Korak. We're dealing with something far beyond our comprehension, something that exists outside of the boundaries we understand. The Guardians were not born of our galaxy, and they don't care for our politics or our struggles. They care only for balance. If we act rashly, we may provoke them into annihilating us without a second thought. But if we approach this with diplomacy and understanding, we may still have a chance." Her words were met with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Han, as the Federation's foremost military strategist, was known for her ability to think several steps ahead. But even she knew that this time, there was no easy answer. Humanity had made enemies before, but the Guardians weren't like the Korak. They were not driven by hatred, greed, or even territorial expansion. They operated on a different scale entirely. "We have to understand what the Guardians truly want," Han continued. "Their warning was clear: we are the disturbance in the balance. But we can't be sure why. If we don't understand what they're looking for, we might be walking into a war that we don't even understand." The room fell silent as the gravity of her words sank in. What did the Guardians mean by balance? Why did they view humanity as a threat? And more importantly, how could they stop what seemed to be an unstoppable force? The Council finally agreed to send a diplomatic delegation to the station, hoping to open communications with the Guardians. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Failure meant death not just for the diplomats, but for all of humanity. Captain Han volunteered to lead the mission herself. She was a leader, not just in battle but in diplomacy. It was a role she had reluctantly embraced after the war with the Korak, but now it would prove her greatest challenge. She would need every ounce of her experience and wisdom to navigate the dangerous unknown ahead. The Federation's flagship Vigilance set course for the heart of the ancient station. The diplomatic team was small, consisting of experts in linguistics, alien biology, and diplomacy, along with a small military contingent for protection. The crew was tense, not just because they were about to step into the unknown, but because they all understood that they might never return. As they entered the massive station's gravity well, the very atmosphere seemed to thrum with energy. The lights flickered erratically, and the station's surface pulsated with an eerie, rhythmic glow. Han stood at the front of the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the ancient structure ahead. She could feel the presence of the Guardians, even without knowing their true form. It was as if the station itself was alive, watching, waiting. Upon docking, the crew stepped cautiously onto the station's surface. The walls were smooth and undulating, almost organic in appearance, like the bones of some colossal creature. Their every footstep seemed to reverberate through the very structure, an unsettling reminder that this place was ancient, and its builders had long since vanished, or had they? The station seemed to pulse with an energy far beyond anything humanity had encountered, almost as though it had been designed to be a beacon, a message for any who came across it. It didn't take long for them to find the central chamber, an enormous hall that stretched for miles in every direction. In the center of the room stood a massive crystalline structure, its facets reflecting the light in ways that seemed almost alive, shifting and changing before their eyes. It was then that the Guardians made their presence truly known. The air around the crystalline structure began to warp. A distortion formed in the center of the chamber, and from it emerged a presence that defied all logic. It wasn't a being in the traditional sense, not a humanoid or alien form, but a presence that filled the room with an overwhelming sense of both power and inevitability. The voice that echoed in the chamber was not human, nor was it alien in the way they understood. It was more like an idea, an abstract force made manifest. And yet, as it spoke, the words were clear, reverberating through their minds directly. Humanity. You are the disruption in the natural order. You have disturbed the balance of the cosmos. You have awakened us. And for that, you must answer. Captain Han stepped forward, her heart racing but her mind focused. She knew that this moment would define everything: her people's future, the future of the galaxy itself. Her voice rang out, steady and commanding. We didn't awaken you to challenge your balance. We didn't seek to disrupt the cosmos. We're not your enemy. But we will fight if we must. We will protect our future. The Guardian's response was not immediate. Instead, there was a silence, a pause that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, the presence spoke again, its tone as deep as the stars themselves. You misunderstand. We do not seek your destruction. But you must prove that you are worthy of existence. Show us that you understand balance. Show us that you can preserve the harmony of the galaxy, or we will cleanse the disorder you have sown. In that moment, Han realized that the Guardians weren't simply an enemy to be fought. They were an ancient test, a force that demanded something greater than strength or conquest. They sought balance and understanding of the deep, unspoken laws of the universe. The Guardians were not interested in domination. They wanted to see if humanity could rise to the challenge of living in harmony with the galaxy, or whether they were simply another species doomed to repeat the mistakes of those who had come before them. The weight of their decision hung heavily on Han's shoulders. She knew that humanity was not perfect, far from it. They had made mistakes, they had fought, they had conquered. But they had also shown an incredible capacity for growth, for unity, for compassion. They had the potential to be something better. But could they prove it to the Guardians? Han's mind raced as she weighed her options. The answer wasn't clear, but she knew one thing for sure: humanity's survival was no longer in the hands of war, but in the hands of wisdom. And that wisdom, she hoped, could convince the Guardians that humanity was worth the galaxy's future. We will prove ourselves, Han said, her voice resolute. We will show you that we understand balance. We will make it right. The silence that followed seemed endless. And then, finally, the voice of the Guardians echoed once more. Very well. The test begins. And with those words, the galaxy's fate was sealed.